Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 4th meeting of the Committee on Ways and Means. Would everyone please rise and salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The members of the committee that are here are Councillor Robert Hass, Councillor George Rotondo, Councillor Charles Patch, and myself, Councillor Powers. Also, Council President Jessica Giannino, and Councillor from Ward 1, Joanne McKenna. There are 5 items on the agenda tonight. The first one we're going to discuss will be the bond authorization in the amount of $100,000 for the Department of Public Works yard design services. I'm going to open this up to the councilors of the committee right now. All right. He's here for the audit, though, right? Actually, give him the batteries.
Sorry about that, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. Sullivan is here for the audit item. Myself and George are here for the other financial items.
For the authorization of the $100,000?
Correct.
Okay. Open up to you, George.
It's up to you. I thought the mayor introduced the item at the last council meeting, but the request is pretty straightforward, and it's for an assessment design that would lead us to both recommendations and hopefully a final recommendation in terms of next steps for that building.
Okay. Councillor Hass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm in favor of this $100,000 authorization. It's about time the city stepped forward to address some of the important needs down at the DPW. There are many needs, and I believe this is the first step to really get into it and to find out what the assessment would really bring about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hass. I'm going to go by members of the committee first. Councillor Rotondo.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to either George or Omar, if you would.
That's the question.
Pardon me?
Have we contracted anybody at this point for the services, or at least thought of contracting, or are we going to put this out to bid?
Through you, Mr. President, we don't have anybody on contract for that project specifically, but this is something that we'd like to act on really quickly. So we'd like the process to be as.
So if you could answer my question.
I just said no. We don't have anybody on contract for that project.
George, you wanted to say something.
Omar, the city has to put an RFP out in order to procure a company to do evaluation, in order to procure a company to do the evaluation of the city yard.
Is our engineer incapable of making a site review of the property at the moment and taking that money that we have, the $100,000, to utilize
Well, our city engineer isn't a structural engineer, which you need down there. Our city engineer is a civil.
Well, we're asking for a site assessment, not a structural
So
assessment.
you're asking for a,
If you're looking for a new building, then that means you would tear that one down and you would have to restructure a new building. So you're talking two different things.
what we're looking for is, what I understand is being proposed is not a new building, see what we can salvage from the building, if any, and is it structurally sound to salvage it? Will it just take a roof?
Well,
Will it take a...
Before I do anything, I want to have an environmental assessment before we give any money away of that nature, because at the very least, knowing about sick building syndrome, which that building clearly looks like.
Point of information, Councillor. There's going to be a public hearing.
I thought this was the place in order to discuss these issues. I mean,
We're discussing it, yes.
oh, thank you.
And I understand that, you want to have an assessment for the quality of air, et cetera. But we're not voting on this tonight. This is,
Well, that's why I'm asking the
Okay.
questions. Thank you.
But I do want to say that in the authorization, where it's a design and a assessment, whereas it not only is going to give us it's a building salvageable, but also give us the fact that if it's environmentally proper to build there. I mean, you can't, not going to get an architect stamp on something that is going to say.
But that's the first thing that you do. We have oil tankers, we have oil tanks there that need to be assessed to see if they're leaking. We also need to take a look at if we have PCBs in the ground. It doesn't make sense to even do a structural assessment until you find out what the groundwork is.
Well, before you do.
You're putting the cart before the horse.
Before you get your report's just not going to come back and say, okay, here's what you got to do with the building. Well, your report's going to come back and say, they're going to take a total, that's why it's 100,000.
Well, we went through this with the mass building program. We went through this with Rumney Marsh. We went through this with the Hill. We went through this with, I mean, this isn't, I'm just going by what the process that we used in the past.
It's going to be the same type of process. It's not one that's going to be just, okay, plop a building on there and there you go.
Well,
It's
of course
gonna
not.
be- No, of course you're not going to do that. So all of this is that we're going to, what's going to need to be done is that when the architect comes back, he's going to have to he'll give us a number of recommendations of what needs to be done, and that will all go up in the package. We have to assess all of that once he gives us his recommendations. The environmental will be part of the assessment, a full going over of the site itself, and then those recommendations will have to come back to the city and see what we have.
Will they do an air quality assessment within that process?
Well, they can't do the, I don't know if they'll do an air quality assessment inside the building, if it's.
Well, if you're salvaging the building, that would be part and parcel of the process.
Well, if we are salvaging the buildings, that's part of one of the recommendations, but the idea of, okay, if you do the air assessment quality, if you send in what they call an air doctor, environmental doctor they can say, okay, you have this problem, but at the same time, that's something that's going to be fixed in the. total
So if I
package.
were to right now get on the phone with OSHA and ask them to put something down there, they would shut you down and they would do it. Because I'm telling you that you've got black mold down there. So this isn't a threat, this is a promise.
Right.
If we do not have an air quality assessment done, I will be calling them to make sure it is done. Because these people down there need to work in an environment that is safe for them. And I don't really care what anybody up here says, period.
Mr. President, so the point here is to have a building where people can work in according to proper workplace standards. The air quality is not the only issue.
Well, that is the main issue because that's a working standard.
Mr. President, I'd like to finish my sentence, please.
yeah,
With all due respect, Mr. President.
Allow him to finish his comments, please.
Council Rule 19, Mr. President.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Councillor Rotondo. If we're going to piecemeal it, it's not going to work. The problem is beyond air quality. When the mayor toured the building, it became very clear that nobody can actually work properly out of building in that shape. This is one step that we're pursuing with that specific yard. The other step that we're pursuing, we know we have to get temporary housing for offices and the rest of the employees to rest when they're performing, operations during snow emergencies. That is being pursued on a parallel track. So we don't want people in that building for longer than they need to be. But the air quality is not the only issue. There are very clear issues, from plumbing to electrical to roofing issues to potential structural issues that we all want to look at.
Unfortunately, through you, Mr. President, unfortunately, the only one that will kill somebody down there readily is the electrical and the environmental, because if you get illness like aspergillus from mold, your survivability is very low, especially when you're on a medication like Humira or what have you, or anything that suppresses your, arthritis or what have you. So what I would say is people who are predisposed to issues or people who are not predisposed to issues are at great risk for aspergillus pneumonia or any other sequelae related to that. And quite frankly, in a working enclosed environment, which that is, the main issue there is environmental, not electrical or anything else. It's environmental. Now, you can argue with me on that, but I'm going to say this. I'm the only expert on that here.
Well, Councilor, there'll be a public hearing on this May 9th, and I've got two other councilors that want to speak. Councilor Patch is a member of the committee.
Mr. President, if I could just follow up for 10 seconds on that last statement.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor. I'm not talking about one main issue. I'm talking about a series of issues. Now, if in your mind one issue is more important than other, or others, then fine, by all means. In our minds, every issue is as important. We want to fix that building as soon as possible. Is air quality a problem? Absolutely. Is plumbing a problem, an electrical problem? Absolutely. So we want to do them all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Patch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I agree with Councilor Haas that this is well overdue. And as far as, I'm sure they're going to come back and say, tear the thing down and get rid of the dirt and get rid of, it's contaminated, and those poor guys down there and girls have been working under terrible conditions for many years now. So I think it's time, and I want to thank you for bringing it forward, and let's get it started. I mean, that's all we can do. We can, wait and see what the report says. I'm sure they're going to tell us everything's wrong down there, and we can get started on the real job of probably building a new one. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Patch. Council President Janino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really happy to see this finally before the council because it's something that's very long overdue. And we're all in the same place with this. We all want to see this improved for the people that work down there. I'll tell you, from my perspective on the council, the DPW is probably where 50% of my complaints and issues and things that I have to deal with for constituents go to. So not only are they one of the most physical and physically intensive departments of the city, they're the ones that are handling all the things that we put through the council. If it's a sign, if it's a pothole, if it's a sidewalk, if it's a guardrail, we're going to them. So I think it's only fair that we give them a facility that they need so they can help us help people. It's a big circle, and I think it's really important that we get it addressed as soon as possible. So I'm glad to see it, and I look forward to getting through the public hearing quickly and voting on it so we can get it fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Janino. I just want to recognize Councilor Zambuto, who is here. I don't know if you want to speak on this, Councilor. Okay. I just want to say very briefly, I want to commend the administration for moving forward on this. And there's an old saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I think on May 9th at the public hearing, after that, we'll take that single step. That's my feeling. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
The next item is, no, this is going to a public hearing, so there'll be no vote tonight. The next item is 16-067, requesting a bond authorization of a $70,000 for a air quality design at the Lincoln School. And I'm going to open that up to Councilor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not too long ago, we had a meeting up at the Lincoln School at the PTA, and it was suggested that they come up with amount of money to look at the design of an air condition for the place. It's been debated by the plant superintendent, Carl Swenson. He came up with some work on it, and I think it's only due, we should move forward with it at this point in time to find out what the design cost would be after the $70,000.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. Any other councilors? Councilor Patch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of this only because it's the, in all fairness, it's the only, outside the high school, the only school that is not air conditioned. And, Beachmont? Oh, Beachmont? I'm sorry, I stand corrected. I thought they had it. Well, anyways, the people in North Revere that I represent were taken out of the Whalen School, which was air-conditioned, and sent to the Lincoln School. So they definitely deserve air conditioning, because they know what it's like to be in school with air conditioning. I don't know if the building is, hopefully the building can handle central air. And that's what I'm sure we'll find out after the design. But again, I am for this, and I know there's a ton of parents down there that really want this to go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Patch. Councilor Zambudo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although I'm not a member of your committee, I appreciate you calling on me. I'm certainly in favor of giving relief to the Lincoln School. They certainly need air conditioning. I guess I just have a question as to, did we get a back of a scratch card idea of how we come up with a $70,000 figure for design services? Was it an RFP? What was actually, how did we come up with this figure?
Well, Council, the way we came up with this figure is that we have an HVAC contract with Amoresco.
Oh, okay.
We contacted the Inspector General's office and requested an opinion of whether or not we could use the Amoresco as the designer on this project. They said yes, and this estimate of $70,000 is from Amoresco.
Yeah, well, now that I hear it's Amoresco and I have complete faith in the organization, and I'm sure it's, like you said, you got the word that it was okay and we're not breaking any laws to hire them. That's great. Now I feel much more comfortable about it.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Any other councilors want to speak on this? Councilor President Janino? Councilor
I
McKinnon?
was at that first meeting that was at the Lincoln School way back when, and it was very obvious that that's what the parents and the students there want. I'll tell you, going to two schools that were not air-conditioned, the Old Whalen and the high school, it's difficult to learn in an environment that's that hot. I've been in McKenna's classroom on the 3rd floor when it was 90 degrees outside, and it was brutal. And it's really hard to ask students to concentrate and teachers to get them to concentrate under those conditions. And I think we all could have that argument. You know, when I was at the school, we didn't have it. But the school year is changing, the school hours are changing, and the environment's changing, so we need to adapt to it. Thank you.
I agree 100%, and this is again going to a public hearing on May 9th, but I can tell you that based on what I know now, I will be supporting this 100% myself. I think it's something that's long overdue. When it comes to quality of life issues, and that is a quality of life issue for children that are trying to learn, we shouldn't be cherry picking. We should make sure that every child in the city is treated in the same manner as the kid next door. Thank you. I want to recognize Councilor Morabito, who's a member of the committee, is here, and Councilor Keefe, he's not a member of the committee, but he's here. And next item, with that said, no one has any more comments on that? Okay. There'll be a public hearing May 9th on both of the two issues that we just discussed. The next item is a request for an appropriation for an external audit in the amount of $72,000. And gentleman from the mayor's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the mayor spoke at length about this item and the need for an audit. I think there were a couple of questions that we would be more happy to answer if they're still outstanding. So that's why I'm here. Mr. Sullivan's here too from Clifton Larson.
I think one of the questions was the rubbish contract. The recycle
Point of order,
contract.
Mr. President.
Pardon me?
Point of order.
State your point.
My understanding was the issues that were at hand at the end of the meeting was to ask questions based upon the audit itself, but also regarding the use of the state auditor. And that was part of the other commentary as well.
Well, we're gonna do that, but I mean, this is just one issue, I think, that explains why we need that audit.
Oh, I agree.
As a matter of fact, if I remember right, you were the one that put the motion in for the audit. So I
That's
hope you'll
why
be
I'm
supporting
talking.
me. Thank you. Councilor Hess, you're a member of the committee.
I'd rather wait and speak later on, okay?
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, what's the difference between this and as requested by a councilor, a state audit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can defer to Mr. Sullivan for more details, but the rationale here is very straightforward. The mayor had a few issues that he wanted to look at in terms of procedures, standards, protocols across departments in a lot of areas, and wanted a specific focus on some departments who handle a significant amount of cash. So those transactions can be a little problematic if they don't have any protocols in place in order to make sure that and check that what's coming in is what's being reported. And this does not have to include any type of malice whatsoever. This is just the sheer tonnage of what's coming in. So once that review process is completed, there may or may not be findings, what they call findings, so red flags. If those red flags arise, then the city's duty through its executive office is to report it in some way or fashion, and then conduct a deeper investigation. Now, depending on the issue, that could be either done with an outside auditing firm, it can be reported to the Ethics Commission, it could be reported to the AG's office, the IG's office. It really depends on what the issue is. But the first step would be to conduct an audit to know what we're talking about, where the monies are, what certain protocols are missing, and then from there, if there needs to be something specific reported, then by all means, we'll report it back to the IG's office. When you call them up, or we call them up and say, hey, we'd like you to come into the city and audit everything. The reason is what? The former mayor was here, so would like an audit, a full audit by the IG's office. It didn't make sense to us, which is why we pursued this route.
Councillor Rotondo.
Through you to Mr. Sullivan.
Just for everyone's edification that may be watching, I believe Mr. Sullivan is the individual from the firm that would be doing the audit?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that correct?
My name is Daniel Sullivan. I'm a principal with Clifton, Lawson, Allen.
Thank you.
Could
Council-
you
Councilor Rotondo.
tell me what happened out in Chicago in which there was an issue about embezzling and your firm was unable to pick it up? In fact, it was the Dixon case. What was the complication with that issue?
It's interesting. The Dixon case is, I mean, it was big. There was a lot of money. When I joined Clifton, Lawson, Allen in 2014, maybe can I step back and just tell you a little bit about myself and how, how I'm here today. I was a principal with Sullivan Rogers and Company. We formed our company in 2002. Prior to that, I was with Powers and Sullivan for 10 years. Been working with local government in a public accounting, auditing, and consulting for the last 24 years. Been in public accounting for 30 years, all in Massachusetts. So for the last 24 years, I have specialized in working with state and local government, mostly local government in Massachusetts. We joined Clifton, Lawson, Allen in 2014 because of the resources and because they were also a firm that does 40% of their work is in public sector, and then quite a bit of that there's nonprofits, but quite a bit of that is also state and local government.
So back to my question regarding Dixon and the embezzlement there out in Chicago.
So, when I joined, it's like that had already happened, and that was the same way with you. I was like...
Then what about the Nevada public employees, in which $35 million was missed by the review of your company, in which actually it was $54 million by the city comptroller, in which fraud took place, and your company had to settle out of court for $35 million on May 14th, 14.
Yeah, that was the Dixon case. That was,
No, that wasn't.
Okay.
I'm referring to two different cases together.
Okay.
Dixon actually, I believe, comes after that by a year. This is one that happens in 2014.
Yeah.
But regardless of
Well,
that,
Dixon
my
did
question to
happen.
you is, when is the last time the FBI hired your company to do a forensic audit of a community?
I've never been involved with the FBI.
So when has the last time the state attorney general has had your company do a forensic audit of any community?
Recently.
Who?
I'm not at liberty to say.
It's public information then, no?
But it's our, as a CPA firm.
Well,
we
what I
don't-
would say
we don't
is,
talk-
generally
We
speaking-
don't talk about our clients, especially if there's investigations going on.
Generally speaking, having spoke to both the Attorney General's office as well as to the Auditor's office, it's generally the auditor that does the forensic part of the work, in particular up in Lawrence, or for that matter, up in Methuen or other communities. I don't notice anything on your website that spoke to how the federal government or the state government actually hired you to do a forensic audit.
Well, the state government typically doesn't hire us, it's the actual city, town.
Right,
school
so that's why I
district
had asked
that
you,
hires us.
that's why the question that I had asked you is, when is the last time the state attorney general had hired you to do a forensic audit? You said that they did, now you're
Well,
saying that they didn't.
we're
Which one is it?
working- I mean, right now, I'm actually working with the Attorney General on it, but it's,
But did they hire you to do the job is the question?
no, the.
Okay,
the
that was
firm-
the question, sir.
The firm, sorry, I misunderstood.
It was pretty straightforward. But
Okay.
that said, Mr. Chairman, through you, I move to ask that we have the state audit solicited to see what the cost of an audit would be through them. My experience in this case is that it's less costly, and more importantly, what's troubling here is the state auditor is the only group of people that actually audits government entities, and it's their sole purview. That's what they do. And more importantly, you know, whether it be the Chelsea Authority, Housing Authority, whether it be the City of Lawrence, the Bond Recreation Authority, or for that matter, even the Probation Department, this is what the state auditor does. And they refer directly to the Ethics Division. They refer directly to the State Attorney General's office. They refer directly to the FBI. Why would we want to have a middleman to do that? Why wouldn't you want the group that actually does this work for government do that work? And no offense to you, Mr. Sullivan, this is not personal, but at the end of the day, we don't even have a cost analysis from another group. This is $72,000. I'm told that we have no money. Why would we not get, another guesstimate from the state auditor who actually does this work on behalf of federal government, on behalf of state government?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
I think there's a need for some kind of clarification or making sure that everybody's on the same page. Nobody's talking about a forensic audit. This is not what we're here for. We're here for an audit. A forensic audit, if findings are there, if there are any issues, we're going to get deeper into it. And that could be the AG's office. Again, that's what I said. It could be the AG's office. We will take their lead. We will take their direction. This is the first step to look at our entire system, be it the 30B procurement process, cash handling, petty cash handling, CDBG grants, other grants, things like that. Now, if we need a forensic audit, we'll go for a forensic audit.
Through you, Mr. President, first and foremost, how many audits have you been through?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a few.
Which ones?
A few in my old city.
Well, I'm asking you, which one? Where?
I'm not going to discuss the particulars of it, but we had a few issues and we had to audit them.
And so you've actually had the state auditor do an audit of your community?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not when I was there.
Okay, so that's my point. I've been through this. And a forensic audit doesn't necessarily have to be what the state audit does. It can do everything that you just said, and then some.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the audits I was involved with were because flags were raised and because there were some issues or apparent issues that had to be investigated. Some of them were forensic, some of them weren't, and they were performed all by outside firms. Now, when we had issues, we did report them to the right authorities, but they didn't come in and do further investigation, or be it forensic or of any other type. They were satisfied with the results and with the findings.
Through you, Mr. President, in my 10 years in government, what I would tell you is that the majority of audits that are done, both state, city, or for that matter, outside of government, that entails this nature of issue, is by the state auditor. Not only are there hundreds of documented cases, but thousands of documented cases of the auditor doing an audit. But I'm surprised you never even went to them to ask for a price. If it's not a forensic audit, they do other audits too. Matter of fact, that's what they did down the DPW yard. And the scope of that audit is bigger than this audit.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that there were very, very specific allegations involved in that investigation. If I
Through
may.
you to the president, I was the one who did that. I was the one who brought that up. So you're talking to the person who actually did the whole thing, in the sense
Through
of
you, Mr. Chair.
bringing this through the eyes of the state.
My understanding is that the IG's office did the investigation. If you're saying that you were the person reporting
They
it,
were the purview of that, that's correct.
that if you were the person reporting it, then that's new information to
And
me.
that was
But
the state auditor.
through you, Mr. Chair, again, my understanding is that the IG's office performed the investigation.
That is incorrect. The state auditor did.
But regardless, my point is, it was a state entity. You're not saying that you performed the investigation.
We both agree with that. I said I was the
Okay.
one who actually initiated it.
Okay, so just to clarify again, we have been, and I worked in Somerville for about 6 years, and we've had we have a pretty good reputation in terms of best practices and proper management. We've had a few auditing performed or audits performed. We've done it by the book. I have never heard any issues whatsoever coming either from the DG's office, state auditor's office, or the IG's office.
How would you if you're not reporting it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, these were not non-public cases. These are things that get reported. What I'm saying is, when the reports came back, there weren't any findings that warranted going to the IG's office for further investigation. That's exactly what I'm
For
saying.
you, Mr.
But
President,
again,
this doesn't make sense
This
whatsoever.
is not a request to go to-
Gentlemen, Councilor Rotondo, I have other councilors here that want to ask questions.
Of course.
I'm sure, and I'm going
Of
to
course.
allow that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Maravito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, what is the timeframe of the audit? What would be the timeframe? And how is that timeframe selected?
The actual, the time periods of like transactions we're going to look at, or when we're going to start the audit? Or,
What timeframe was
okay,
selected for
well,
the,
There's 5 different areas that we're going to be involved in looking at, and some of them have different categories. But roughly would be what's happening now, and then going back to look at transactions so that we can get an understanding of what. So for example, one of the things that we're going to be hired to do is go and look at all the funds that are listed on your munis accounting ledgers and identify what the purpose of those funds are. And so what we would have to do is probably look back at transactions to determine if the transactions are being made within the purpose, and we're going to look at what Mass General Law statute those special revenue funds or capital projects or et cetera were established, and is it working in that order?
so
we
how
would
how
be
far
going
back? Can you give me
Nope,
an
on
estimate?
this one
5
here,
years,
we-
3 years, 2 years?
2 years. Yep, on the very first one, we would go back 2 years.
Now, so it's a $72,000 flat rate, is that correct? So it will not change whatsoever? It won't increase at all?
We feel pretty confident that we will be able to perform the 5 procedures that we're going to be doing within the 72,000, yes. And I've been doing this for a while, so yes, it's a flat fee agreed upon not to exceed. It could be under, but it won't go over.
Thank you. I have one more question. So say if we did go have a state audit, would the auditor actually come into the city and do the audit? Or I believe they hire a third party, correct? Unless it was a random audit done by the state, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the IG's office has its own auditing unit, but I can't speak for them.
Point of personal information. The state auditor comes up and performs the audit with their team. It is not the Inspector General. Let's clarify that right now. The Inspector General is a federal entity. The state auditor is a state entity. If we're asking for a state audit, it is the state auditor that comes up here, as are the people that came before this council in 2008, apprised Councilor Haas, Guanasso, Zambuto, and myself, and nope, that's it. I was going to say Patch, but he wasn't here, and yourself, Councilor Powers, and apprised us of the audit that they were going to undertake. And, excuse me. And, and actually what they did, and it was the state auditor, and they came down, and that was referred to the Inspector General's office, to Jimmy Siracusa, who referred it to Mark Toulouse from the FBI. Thank you.
How long from the initial request did it take the auditor's team to come to the city and conduct the audit?
Point of personal information, Mr. President. Just to answer Councilor Morabito's question, I can tell you that once we had certified the money and Mayor Ambrosino sent out the request to the state auditor, it was a week turnaround time.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may add to that.
Yes, sir.
The difference, Councilor Morabito, between those two situations, that situation and this one is, we don't have a complaint. We don't have a report of somebody doing something wrong.
Point of information, Mr. President.
State your point.
It is routinely asked by municipalities to ask the state auditor. You do not need to have a complaint. You can ask them to do it. In fact, at that time, there was no complaint made of any malfeasance whatsoever. What was asked was an audit of the Department of Public Works for an 18-month period, looking at the entire operation of the DPW to include permits, gas boy, process procedure, as well as point of sale. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm not saying that we need a complaint or not need a complaint. I'm saying the difference between the two situations. I'm stating that.
Thank you. Are there any other councilors that want to? Councilor Patch? Councilor Zambuto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been here a long time. I served with this gentleman next to me for quite a while, and we don't always agree. In fact, well, I think if you looked at the history, it was probably rare that we agree. But on this one issue, I do agree that if we're going to go forward with this audit, with all due respect to the gentleman from the firm, this should be done through a state audit, and that's the only way I'm going to support this. I know this is going to a public hearing, but I just want to put my cards on the table right now, and that's where I stand with this. Thank you.
No, this is not going to a public hearing. We're going to vote on this tonight.
Well, then,
It's gracious.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yeah,
do one more
yes.
thing.
It's an appropriation.
well, it's an appropriation, and I think I'll be making a substitute motion at that time.
It's an appropriation. It has to come out of the fund, right? Rainy day fund? It has to be appropriated.
Any other councilors want to speak on this? Councilor McKenna?
To you, Mr. President, to Councillor Rotondo. When you were on that committee, Councillor, could you tell me how much that cost the city for the state to come in and audit?
Sure, that was $25,000. What they found was 46,000 gallons of gasoline unaccounted for, 220 permits that were not paid nor accounted for or allocated. There were other discrepancies within the processes and procedures. They had implemented services that needed to be done. It was for a scope of period of, I believe, 18 months. It investigated everything from the use of vehicles to the actual use of equipment, the allocation of equipment. It was far broader in scope. It also included other financial issues within that. But that's all online. I'm more than happy to hand that over to you. I've got it in my my computer. I sent it actually to the mayor's office as well. Again, that is far broader in scope than what's taking place right now. That's why my concern is, many of the things that were in question then, the state auditor had full purview and access to, because whenever you're using 30B, like equipment procurement and so forth, they have access to that information, or for that matter, community block grants, which were sent through the Water and Sewer Department. They have access to that too, because it has to be submitted to the state. That's why back then I had chose the state auditor and asking the mayor and this body to go forward with that, and they came back with a $25,000 price tag for basically what appears to be twice the scope that we're going to do in this audit, but yet almost 3 times the value.
Mr. Chair.
Was there any disciplinary actions when they found those faulty findings?
I can tell you that they had convened an ethics division trial. They had referred to both the Attorney General and to the Federal Bureau of Investigations. I also understand that the federal assistant Attorney General at that point, I don't know who it was before Ortiz, but I forget that person's name, had gotten to their office as well, but they were not able to prove anything at the federal level.
Mr. Chair, just a quick correction.
State your point, sir.
I would like to be very clear, the scope is not double or half of the other scope. These are very different scopes. I just want to make sure that we can argue on
Point of order, Mr. President.
what you're considering to be a double or not, but I want to make sure that that's on the record.
Point of order, Mr. President.
State your point, please. And then we're going to, if there are other councils that want to speak, we're going to take this up for vote before the committee. I feel that this city, 3 months ago, elected a mayor to do a job in this city, and I think he's trying very hard to do that job, and this is one of the tools he needs to do that job.
Well, Mr. President, I do respect that, but remember, this is the issue of checks and balances. That's why we're here to protect the people's money, plain and simple. Now, I know you agree with that philosophy. I certainly agree with the mayor managing the city, and I support him on that. But at the end of the day, we're supposed to ensure that the pocketbook is safe, too. That's our check. That's what we're supposed to do. And with all due respect, it is twice the audit. And that's not a matter of guessing. That's a matter of fact. And in fact, you can pull the record and look at that. I implore the people of the city of Revere to do that, and I ask that the mayor's office put down the audit that they're requesting on the city's front, profile, so that they can see exactly what they're going to be paying for versus what they got in the past. And I can tell you, Mr. President, I can guarantee you, Mr. President, it's not just 5 things on 1 page from the other audit. It's over 25 pages in which the audit was done for a 2-page request, and that is in the mayor's files from Tom Ambrosino. Thank
Through you,
you.
Mr. Chair, I hope residents would actually do that.
Council President Janino.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Speak.
It's just my hope that we can move forward as a city. You know, it's a new chapter for the city, and I think the purpose of this audit was to help us move forward, not to look at the past. We all know there were issues in the past. There were a lot of issues in the past. And I think the point of this motion and the point of this audit is so we can identify what the most recent issues were in the past, so we as a city can finally move forward and separate ourselves from those issues that seem to have a good place in our past. So as much as the former audit is relevant, I think it's more important that we discuss the motion on the table and the audit that we're looking at now. Thank you.
I agree 100%. Any other councilors? One is Councilor Hess.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the $72,000 as presented as a motion.
Call the roll, please, of the council committee.
Shall the City Council approve a transfer in the amount of $72,000 from the Stabilization Fund to the Mayor's Contracted Services account for the purposes of an external audit to be performed by Clifton and Larson?
Point of order. Point of order.
State your point.
This is just a committee vote, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct, and then
Thank
it will be
you. I
reported
just-
out before the full council.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Haas? Yes. Councillor Morbido?
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Patch?
No.
No. Councillor Rotondo?
No.
No. Councillor and Chairman Powers? Oh, I'm sorry, Council President Janino, you're a voting member as well.
Yes.
Yes, and Councillor Powers?
Yes.
Yes, it passes.
This will be reported out this evening for a vote of the full city council.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Certainly.
I will be submitting a minority report to that as well.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I
Counselor.
just want to make the point that the reason I voted no is that I prefer a state audit instead of
Pardon me?
this particular audit. Thank you.
Well noted.
Just a point of information, the next subcommittee is scheduled to meet in a few moments. We still have a few items on the agenda for this one.
Pardon
so-
me?
The next subcommittee meeting is scheduled to meet in just a few moments, so are we going to be starting that one late and taking up the rest of this agenda, or do you plan on having another meeting?
Motion to move the motion regarding a state audit?
We just voted.
No, state auditor. We just voted on their $72,000 procurement. It's two different things.
This is your substitute motion.
This was my motion that I put before they even came up here for an audit.
Ash?
That's right, that was the first motion, Bob.
Wants to take a vote on the 16015. It's the last one. You want to do,
Mr. President, I also must point out parliamentary procedure in which a point of order has to be recognized. My motion was prior to the vote for the 72,000, yet you did not suspend rules and you forwarded that motion above the primary motion. If you look at our rules of order, it is supposed to be going by the calendar of which events took place. That did not take place here. I just want to make that as a point of information.
point taken. Now, you have a motion here, 16055, motion, Councilor Rotondo requesting an update of the 2016 budget. Specifically, what are you looking, I know we all have
I believe
copies
the
of the
first
budget.
motion, as in the order of the calendar, would have been the motion regarding the state audit, which I asked for, which was referred to your committee. That would be the one that would be first, if I'm not mistaken.
Point of information, it's 16-015.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to take a vote on that now?
On the auditor, yes.
Yeah, okay. Call the roll.
On the motion of Councillor Rotondo requesting an audit of all municipal offices using the state auditor, Councillor Haas? No. No. Councillor Morbido? No. No. Councillor Patch?
It's an audit of,
What, I didn't get, what do you, could you state that
This was on the
again?
motion of Councillor Rotondo. He was requesting an audit of all municipal offices using the state auditor.
So that would be using the state audit instead of the one that the mayor is requesting? And I would vote yes on this then.
Councillor Patch voting yes. Councillor Rotondo?
yes.
Yes. Council President Janino?
No.
No. And Chairman Powers?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. No, no. No.
The motion fails in committee.
Okay. Now, let's get down to 16055. Would you be specific, Councilor Rotondo? The motion calls for requesting an update on the FY 2016 budget, which I believe we all have. What particular update are you looking for?
Sure, I'd like to find out what the overtime was for the month of December and April for the DPW, as well as the Department of Public Works, as well as the Police Department in both those months.
April and December.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Just to clarify, 2 separate months, not the
Correct,
period.
correct.
DPW and the police department?
And the Fire Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's it. No further business. That concludes the 2016, April 4th meeting of the Committee on Ways and Means.